Super. All right, now that we're recording, let's try it again. Welcome to the second annual Love Methods Week. This is a webinar on best practices for public sharing from Protocols.io. My name is Lenny Teytelman. I'm the president and co-founder of Protocols.io, scientist by training, genetics, experimental and computational biology. And we do also have two other scientists from Protocols.io, our head of outreach, Dr. Gabrielle Gasque, and our director of strategic initiatives, Dr. Emma Ganley. They're also here in the background. So if you have questions about Protocols.io or anything that I'm talking about as we go through the webinar, before we get to the Q&A, feel free to put the questions in. And as I said, we are recording it, so let me start sharing. Okay, so in terms of the agenda, we'll start with just a few housekeeping things and then go through an introduction talking about the state of public protocol sharing. And what I really want to focus on today is not just, oh, we need to do better, there is room for improvement, but I really want to talk about the sort of superstars of public protocol sharing that we have today, and how, if you are one of the superstars, how you can do a little bit better than sort of the standard sharing that we'll talk about. And in the end, before the Q&A, that will probably be the only Protocols.io specific part where I'll talk about some ways quickly that are new on Protocols.io to share existing protocols if you're trying to get credit and recognition for your work and improve reproducibility as you publish. So getting started with the housekeeping, as I said, we are recording it. If you need closed captioning, it should be enabled, and in the Zoom control panel, you should be able to turn it on. And as I said in the agenda, there will be Q&A at the end. You don't have to wait till the end. As I said, Dr. Ganley and Dr. Gasque are also on this webinar, and if you have questions, you can put them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll either get to them after my presentation or as we go along in the comments in Zoom. This is, as I said in the agenda, this is not a Protocols.io introduction. This is not a Protocols.io heavy webinar by any means. If you're new and would like to learn more about the platform, there is a link to the monthly webinars that we offer on the platform itself. You can also request a one-on-one demo if it's specific to Protocols.io. And importantly, I also wanted to say that there are many events that are happening. If you learned of this webinar from Protocols.io email, this webinar is not a regular one that we run. This is part of the second instance of Love Methods Week, which is sort of coming out of more established love data weeks that have been happening for a number of years, but this is a full week of events. Some of them are happening in person. Many of them are happening like this in webinar online format. So take a look. And as we mentioned, the housekeeping at the top, the recording of this webinar and the slides for it, we will distribute to everyone who has registered sometime later today or tomorrow. All right, so let's jump in to talk about state of protocol sharing. Anyone who has seen one of the three of us present Protocols IO in 10 years will probably have heard us talk about the Cancer Biology Reproducibility Project, which was an initiative to independently replicate experiments in published high-profile cancer papers, molecular biology cancer papers, not work with patients. And this is an initiative that was a collaboration between the Center for Open Science and Science Exchange. And they set out to replicate 103 experiments from those 53 published papers. And I think 2017 or 18 is when the initiative wound down because it was really hard to do for a number of reasons. One of the key ones was that it was really hard to get the detailed protocols describing what exactly was done in the paper. And the summary in the Center for Open Science page, the summary for this initiative, highlights that exactly 0 of the papers had completely described the protocol in the paper itself. So there was a need to contact the authors of the work, have them dig around and try to figure out what protocol was used. So many of you, if you've been in another webinar of Protocols IO, will have heard this. We're not going to spend too much time on it, but I did want, in terms of what is the state, I wanted to sort of check in on where are we today. So this, as I said, is an initiative that started in 2014, but an important question is, are we doing better? And there is a fairly recent effort to take a look at how we're doing with protocol sharing in research papers. So exactly along this line. In all articles in Public Library of Science, and this is a collaboration between an organization called DataSeer and the Public Library of Science. So they took a look at all PLOS papers by the year and checked how frequently do they see detailed protocols being shared. The takeaway is that unlike sharing of code and data that they were also analyzing separately, there has really not been much of a change. So this was analyzing papers from 2019 to 2023, but I think we can make an argument that over the last 10, 20 years, the rate of how many people are sharing protocols, detailed protocols, when they publish a research article, has probably been fairly stable. In PLOS, they're saying it's about 8% of the papers that have a link to a detailed protocol. It might not include links to everything that's in the papers. This 8%, I would take it with a grain of salt because it's specific to PLOS, it's specific to how this analysis was done. It wasn't a manually curated effort, but a computational attempt to quantify this sharing. But I don't think there is any evidence that we're doing much better. I don't want this webinar to be depressing, so I do want to have an optimistic side note, which is that in the 10 years that I've been, more than 10 years, we launched in 2014, in the more than a decade that I've been involved with Protocols IO, I definitely see, it's not a quantifiable, but I definitely see a shift in the recognition of the importance of methods. So what, conversations that have been happening about reproducibility, if we go back 10 years, they almost always focused exclusively on data and code. And over the last 10 years, I've seen a lot more attention from funders, from journals, and reproducibility conferences, a lot more attention to methods and reagents, not just to data and code. So this webinar itself, the fact that it's part of Lab Methods Week is very near and dear to my heart, and I find really encouraging. It wasn't Protocols.io that started this annual week. And not too long ago, this paper was published that sort of links to a report for the European Commission that is a product of a lot of work from a lot of different organizations, including Dr. Ganley from Protocols.io. And this is an effort called ProMap, Promoting Reusable and Open Methods and Protocols Can Improve Methodological Reporting in the Life Sciences. And the paper and the report that it links to talks in detail about what are best practices. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was actually a ProMap webinar today. If that's been recorded, if you missed it, you can take a look. And this is an initiative of a lot of academics, a lot of different stakeholders, looking and talking about how should we be sharing methods. So I'm not going to be duplicating the ProMap webinar and going into a lot of detail on that. But I did want to say that things are not just exactly as they were 10 years ago. Moreover, if we look at availability of protocols and recognition of the importance of protocols, it's not just the last 10 years. I would say the last 20 years have seen sort of surge of places where you can share research protocols. So Nature Methods launched in 2006, Nature Protocols, or maybe it was 2004, I think Nature Protocols soon after, but all of the journals and venues for sharing protocols described here, that's really over the last 20 years. So there are definitely many more journals. A lot of the content that's coming out on these is open access. So there's a lot more availability of protocols. There are definitely changes over the last 10 years and what publishers are saying, what publishers are requesting that you do when you submit a paper, and what funders are expecting. So there are reasons for optimism, but I think when we zoom into the bulk of research communication, right, which is publishing our research articles, I don't think we've made huge progress there. That's why the efforts like ProMap that are very recent are so important, and pushes by funders and other stakeholders are so critical. But if we take a look at total biomedical papers that are published, so we're not talking physics and chemistry and anthropology, all research fields, but just the papers that are in PubMed. Last year in 2024, there were 1.7 million papers, more than 1.7 million papers that were published. And that's, if we take a look at the number of public protocols and Protocols.io from last year, we had something around 2,600 new public protocols. So it's not even a percent of all of the papers that are published, linking, using Protocols.io, linking to a protocol. And it's consistent with what the PLOS DataSeer analysis was picking up in the PLOS papers. And I think it's pretty safe to say that the number of people that do share routinely when they're publishing an article is fewer than one or two out of 100. So there's a lot of room for improvement. But for this webinar, I want to focus not on what should we be doing to encourage people to share more. What I want to focus on is for the champions, for the superstars, that 1 or 2% that are sharing protocols. I want to talk about where these people usually are sharing and how we can do a little bit better. So if we take a look at where that sharing is happening, again, going back to the PLOS and data seer analysis, most of the sharing is actually happening as supplementary files. And the estimate is that about 1 to 2% of research articles have an accompanying supplementary protocol, one or more. This, of course, is better than 0%, but as I just said on the previous slide, if you're one of the people that shares research articles, that shares as part of publishing, shares supplementary files, you are actually a superstar. You're doing what most people should be doing in terms of sharing protocols, and are typically not. So you're not in the cancer biology reproducibility summary of 0% of papers. You're already way ahead of the curve, and I would call you a protocol sharing champion. But if we think back to the 1.7 million papers that were published last year, 1 to 2% of that is something around 20,000 supplementary protocols, or 20,000 research papers. If this percent from PLOS holds across different journals in the biomedical sciences, then we can expect about 20,000 papers that have supplementary protocols from last year. And compared to the 2,500 public protocols that were shared on Protocols.io last year, obviously still vast majority is when you do share as a researcher, when you do share protocols, the vast majority are sharing it as supplementary protocols. And then the other place, which we don't often think about, but I am willing to bet contains more than Protocols.io. We just a month ago, in January, crossed 20,000 public protocols, which I think is a huge accomplishment for Protocols.io, and I'm thrilled about it. But I'm willing to bet that there are more protocols that are shared outside of the supplementary and outside of Protocols.io. I'm willing to bet that there are more protocols shared on actually individual lab websites. And here, instead of just a slide, I want to just show a few examples. There are countless lab websites where faculty and the research teams take the time not just to describe their projects and who is in the lab to try to attract people, but they take the time and energy to create a lab protocol or resources section of their lab website and share all of the protocols that they're using in their research. These are PDFs, sometimes they're Word files, sometimes Excel, but you can see just in this one lab website how much they've put up. Here is an example from Dartmouth. Here is an example from, I think it's Brigham Young University. And this is a lot of work. Some of these are Word documents, some of these are PDFs. And again, just like the people that are sharing supplementary protocols, these are, in my mind, these are superstars, right? A lab that takes time to create a section on their lab website and categorize, share the protocols that they use for public consumption, they are awesome. If any of you are on the call on this webinar who are doing it, I think this is fantastic, but not perfect. So if we go back to the slides, second, I don't have a quantified estimate of how many protocols live on laboratory websites. As I said, it's just my intuition from the many that I've come across. And I do think it's thousands and thousands of such protocols. So they are enabling, they do help with reproducibility. The protocols are out there, but there's a lot of room for improvement. And now I want to talk a little bit about the reasons not to share in supplementary or just on the lab website. So in 2019, in The Scientist, there was an article that I was very happy to see, titled "The Push to Replace Journal Supplements with Repositories." So this is not about lab websites. This is about supplementary information in journals that 1 to 2% of research article publishing. And the call is to use repositories. And the article, there's a link to it at the bottom. And Gabrielle or Emma, maybe you can add the link to it in the webinar chat in Zoom. Again, we will share the slides. You will have links, but this is a good article. And it talks about a number of problems with supplementary information and research articles, one of which is that frequently the links break down. Even though these are supplementary files with publishers, there is link decay, just as with data sets, there is link decay and problems with supplementary files. So thank you. So the article that I think there's a link to now in the chat, this article talks about within a publisher that links just stopped working because of an internal change in how the supplementary files are posted. I also wanted to say on top of it that very frequently, obviously not Elsevier, Wiley, Springer Nature, but a lot of journals frequently move platforms. If you're a society journal, you might get a better deal with Oxford University Press than with Highwire, Cambridge University Press, and there are a lot of competing platforms that will host the journal, and journals do move. So even though, I'm not talking about bankruptcy or a journal ceasing to exist, but even for journals that are very old, respected, they do move platforms, and in that move, very often supplementary files stop working temporarily, get lost, and stop working altogether. But it's not a great system. It can be frustrating. You might need to contact the publisher, as in this article, and try to get the problem fixed. It can take a long time. It's not a foolproof way of sharing. And the other thing to note is that the sharing through supplementary files, it is not indexed in Google Scholar. It is quite hard, unless you're reading a paper, it is quite hard to find the supplementary information. So it's sort of hidden from view. Some of it is available in regular Google searches, but definitely not in Google Scholar. And an example, in terms of the limiting of reuse when you're sharing on supplementary websites, is that there's a beautiful example on Protocols.io that I love to come back to, where a researcher from Chile was looking for an RNA extraction method. The details of the biology are not important, but was asking for something that would work in neuron cultures. And scientists from California responded that there's several of these on Protocols.io, and here's a link to the one that should work for you. And what's amazing about this is that if you actually go to the protocol that was recommended as a response to the request, the protocol is not in cortical neuron cultures. It's in a paper in the journal Gigascience on 3-spine stickleback parasites. So it's a method that should work in neuron cultures, but if you're sharing, if the authors from Australia who published this paper only shared it, the protocol as a supplementary accompanying this paper, there is no way that it would surface up. The chances of this researcher who's looking at something for neuron cultures coming across the protocol that they need in a 3-spine stickleback parasite paper are close to zero. So when you're sharing repositories, just as the scientist article above recommends, you're really enabling reuse. Obviously, as a co-founder of Protocols.io, I'm a huge advocate for Protocols.io and have clear conflict of interest. There are many different repositories where you can share if you don't want to use Protocols.io for some reason. There's Figshare, Zenodo. There are different places. You could be using GitHub to share protocols. So there's sort of generalist repositories. Center for Open Science is a place where you can share protocols and get a DOI. But wherever you choose to share it, it does become more discoverable and easier to reuse if you're not doing it as a supplementary file. And when it comes to lab websites, broken links are even more of a problem. So here is a illustration of this link decay from a paper in bioinformatics. And this is just one paper that I took a figure from, but there are many, many papers around data set availability and why we want to be using repositories, why it's a good idea to use NCBI archive for your DNA sequences or PDB for protein structures, rather than say it's available on our lab website, or here's the Amazon server, where here's the link to the Amazon drive where it is. Over time, links to websites stop working, and that includes laboratory academic websites. So what this shows, this was a paper that tried to, in 2007, replicate on Medline, a sample of Medline articles, what they looked at in 2004. And the takeaway in the abstract of the paper is that from 2004 to 2007, link decay had not improved. And what this chart shows is that if you look at papers in 2007 that are published in 2007, most of the links work. So maybe around 9 to 10% won't work. But as you go back in time, the percent of links to data sets that is available rapidly declines. And when you go back about 10 years, you're now at a point where half of the links in the research articles do not actually work. So this is a similar problem to what we talked about supplementary, but it's even more severe. The reason for it is that journals move, but labs move much more frequently. Laboratories move between universities. There are infrastructure changes. There are changes in URLs, IT changes within universities, and the links to the files frequently break. I think it's kind of funny, case in point, that as I was preparing this webinar, the paper on the push to replace journal supplements with repositories, we've been including a link to this paper in many of our webinars since it came out in 2019. And I realized yesterday that the link to this paper doesn't work. So when I tried to access it from our own webinars and slides, I got a 404 and then had to figure out that the URL on the scientist for this article changed. So news opinion should be taken out from the URL. That was an internal move, and now this link does work. So it's updated in the slides, but even in journals, even in publications, this is an issue, and it's a huge issue when we're using lab websites to share the work. So again, you're a champion if you have a lab website with a protocol section, but using repositories is a much better way to do it. And it's not just because the links break, it's also because of versioning. So protocols, unlike a snapshot figure in a paper or a data set that here's what we analyzed, here's the assembly of the mouse genome that we did the bioinformatics of, protocols evolve, unlike data sets and figures and papers. Our reagents, our materials, our equipment, our approaches, we optimize protocols. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, about 10% of the 20,000 protocols that we have on Protocols.io are versions. Here's an example of a protocol that is on version 8. And all of the repositories that I mentioned, again, if you don't want to use Protocols.io, just please use another repository, Figshare, Center for Open Science, Zenodo. With a click of a button, you can create a new version, improve something, correct something on a research article. If you shared it as supplementary, there's just no way to update a supplementary file, essentially. The barrier to do that is so high, and I don't even know if journals have systems. Most publishers don't have systems for updating the supplementary files, so you're just not going to do that. And on lab websites, it's doable, but unless you're the professor who is running and making updates to the lab website, from my graduate and postdoc days, there is somebody usually tasked with that. If that person leaves, sometimes the website doesn't get updated for a year or two. If you're the author of a protocol, but not the person who is supposed to make changes on the website, you have to bother someone else on the research team. It's a burden. If you use repositories, sharing a version is really easy. The other thing I wanted to say about sharing on lab websites is that I may be able to find your protocol, but if you want me to give you credit, if your protocol is on Figshare or Zenodo or Protocols.io, there is a Cite Me link that's very easy to grab. If the protocol is on the lab website, I have to think, how exactly do I cite it? How do I add a link to it? And then I have to keep in mind that there is a high chance that the link will not be available in a couple of years. So if you're one of the champions of reproducible science, you do have a protocol section on your website, you're actually less likely to get credit for this and to have your protocols cited than if you put them in a repository, right? And we're getting closer to the Q&A section, but it is easy. It is easy for me to push and advocate for using repositories. It's one of the key recommendations in the ProMap effort. I think it's easy to recognize why we should be doing that. But there are barriers, and the biggest barrier is time, right? So if we open up examples, these are lab websites that have protocol sections, but instead of PDFs there, so this is from, I think, Exeter University. What we'd like to get to, if we had the time to put our protocols.io or another repository, what we'd like to get to is something like this, where the protocol section just says all of our work. We strive to make as open and reproducible, and all of our developed protocols can be found on protocols.io. All of our scripts are available on GitHub. So this is linked to GitHub. This is linked to their space on protocols.io. This is from University in Ohio, the Ohio State University. And again, this is a very, very advanced method development lab that shares a lot of protocols. They took the effort to put almost 150 protocols on protocols.io. And when you come to their website, it says updates and discussions, please do on protocols.io, and most of the protocol links go to protocols.io from them. This is fantastic. The question is, how do you get there? So the 1.7 million articles that were published last year come from somewhere between 5 and 6 million different scientists on those papers. There are 150,000 or so researchers with accounts on protocols.io, which means that the vast majority of those millions of scientists don't have an account on protocols.io. So if you're a champion and you routinely share supplementary information, if you don't have an account on protocols.io and you're publishing a paper and you're finding out at the moment of submission in the author guidelines, a lot of journals and publishers do recommend that instead of supplementary, you put your protocols on protocols.io specifically. But if you're discovering protocols.io at the time of publication, you have to do a million things to get your paper out. It's a huge effort to submit and comply with all of the million requirements and go through the manuscript submission system, and to create an account on protocols.io and take your PDF or Word file and get it into protocols.io takes time. And so that is one of the key limitations. If you have a lab website where you've shared 50 protocols as PDFs, how do you get them into protocols.io? So if you're a champion, and this is the part that I'm really excited to share, if you're a champion, there is a bottleneck and a barrier to switching to a repository. For Figshare or Center for Open Science, there isn't much of a barrier because you are sharing, you're going to be sharing the PDF itself. But if you want to share in protocols.io so that people can ask you questions about it, so that people, if you share a PDF, I cannot take your PDF and start modifying it. I would have to put it into Google Docs or my Word document, so they're not easily reusable. If you're sharing on protocols.io, for those who know protocols.io, it's easy to comment, to collaborate. Every protocol is sort of a template. You can take it and create a fork just as on GitHub, start modifying it. The problem is it's easy to share a PDF if it already exists. It's much harder to get it into the protocols IO format. And this has been a challenge for us since we launched in 2014. And the part that I wanted to finish the webinar with before we go into Q&A, if you do want to share on protocols IO, if you do have a lot of existing protocols and I'm wondering, how do I get them into protocols IO? As of a couple of months ago, there is now an AI import helper. So if you sign into protocols IO, you'll end up in your file manager. This is a demo workspace. And of course, you can create new protocols from scratch. But if you have existing protocols, if you drag and drop them into your workspace, if you then click on the PDF, there is a create new protocol from this file via OpenAI API. And so you can, with a click, convert the PDF to a protocol in protocols IO. You don't have to stay and wait. It's going to take a couple of minutes. If you have another PDF, you can do the same thing. So you can pull in 50 protocols, click this, and in a couple of minutes, it will create a protocols IO version of it. The AI importer, as I said, we rolled out, I think, at the end of last year. So it's a couple of months old in terms of being live. We are constantly improving it. It's not perfect. When you click on it, we tell you that it's not perfect and you should check for accuracy of the steps. But more often than not, it surprises us, given it was a lot of work that our engineers put into it, but it now often surprises the scientists on the protocols IO team how well it does at figuring out what are the steps, what goes into the guidelines, what goes into materials. So it's still a little bit of work to check, and then it will take you, once you're happy with it, it's another 3 minutes to make the protocol public. So it is a little bit of work. It will take you, 5-10 minutes, but it's not 2-3 hours anymore. And of course, as before, if your institution has a site license for protocols IO, you can use the importer, but you can also use our manual curation, drop a file into the protocol import space on the website. You can find it in the footer and send it for our editorial team to import. But if you don't have a site license, or even if you do and you don't want to wait a week, this is a really good way to start getting existing protocols into protocols IO. And again, of course, if you want to use Center for Open Science, Figshare, the generalist repositories, it's still, I think, a lot better than lab websites or supplementary files. And in that case, you can just share the PDF itself, right? We are about to transition to the Q&A. But before we do, I just wanted to say that there is a link to feedback. This is a new thing on all of the webinars that we now do. We are trying to get feedback. We'll send this out with the slides and recording, but the feedback really helps us. It's a quick Google form, a couple of questions. I think Emma Gabrielle just shared it in the chat. If you can take a few moments after the webinar to give us feedback, that helps us improve the content speed, what we're covering in these webinars. I will stop there and let's see if there are any questions. If you'd like to ask a question, as a reminder, you can do it in the Q&A. I think there were 2 questions that were already answered, or you can raise your hand, we'll unmute you and you can ask, without typing.
Lenny, Both of the
Yes,
questions that were asked are very worth going over, I think. So
absolutely. That's what I was about to do. Thank you, Emma. So in the Q&A, you'll see there are two answered questions, but the first one, the question is, can you explain why the repositories are free of link decay issue? Do they use something other than URL? Brilliant. I thought I should talk about it yesterday, and I forgot to do that. So there is an answer here from Emma or Gabrielle, and the answer, why do repositories work better is because they have document object identifier. So it's a persistent identifier, DOI. And the written answer is repositories generally use some sort of persistent identifier, like a DOI, for the item being posted. As these are provided to ensure a persistence for the item, the longevity is, in theory, guaranteed. I don't know. I think, am I still sharing? No, I think I stopped the sharing. I did want to highlight why the DOIs work and fix the link decay. So before there was protocols IO, one of the efforts from Nature, before it became Springer Nature, was to create a protocol repository. Also, I think 2008 or 9 is when it launched, years before Protocols IO, open access. Now the Protocols IO is part of Springer Nature. Protocol Exchange and Protocols IO are merging. So if you come to Protocol Exchange, they have about 2,000 protocols, and there's already an announcement that all of this content is migrating into Protocols IO so that it can take advantage, so that these protocols have all of the functionality, commenting, reuse, versioning that's easy to do on Protocols IO, the forking that I was describing. So there is an announcement that this content is transitioning. That should happen, I think, next month. But as part of this, one of the things we had to be very careful about is making sure that any links to the existing protocols, these 2,000 protocols that are currently in Protocol Exchange, we have to make sure that the links to them will continue working. So the best practice for all repositories when you're citing is not to grab, let's open one of these. The best practice is not to grab the link and mention it in your paper or on Twitter. The best practice is to take the DOI that is on all of the repositories very prominently featured. The DOI is, there's a special resolver. It's a persistent link, and Protocol Exchange used to live on nature.com. It now lives on researchsquare.com. So that move happened in 2019. This year, the link will become Protocols IO for this. But we are going to work with Crossref to make sure that the links through the DOI, any mentions in any published research or anywhere else, that this link, instead of pointing to researchsquare.com, is going to point to Protocols.io. So that's our responsibility as a publisher, as a repository. That's what all the repositories do. And a lot of the publishers, a lot of the repositories are also members of digital preservation service called Clocks. I think it's a nonprofit out of Stanford. So I think most biomedical publishers, Protocols.io is part of this. What this guarantees is that if a journal or a website ceases to exist, if they're members, the DOIs will, instead of linking to a now defunct website or to a shoe website in its reincarnation, the DOIs will switch and point to the archived PDFs that are in this repository. So they're, the publishers that exist, the repositories, we strive to make sure that the links don't break. And in the worst case scenario, there are other mechanisms, right, that are supposed to ensure that the content doesn't disappear with the move and that there's no link decay. So DOI doesn't completely guarantee it, right? You have to be a member of Clock, so you have to think about, oh, we're switching the links from this to that. The platform is moving, but that is our responsibility. And things like Center for Open Science, Protocols.io has been around for 10 years. All of the links on Protocols.io from 2014, they continue to work, right? And in the worst case, I think the worst case for me was always bankruptcy when we're a startup. Now that we're part of Springer Nature, I think worst case is quite unlikely. But even so, if Protocols.io switches to another domain, the DOIs will continue to resolve. I probably spent too long answering that, but as you can see, I really enjoyed that question. The next question is, does a method have to be novel for me to publish a protocol for it? Does it matter if I publish in a repository or with a methods journal? Fantastic question. You will actually notice if I go to Protocols.io, any protocol that you have on Protocols.io, when you click on peer review options, there are method journals that explicitly welcome protocols from Protocols.io for peer review. The slide that I showed on sort of that renaissance, the surge of method journals, not all of them are here yet. We hope to be adding more and more. These are journals that explicitly, whose editors explicitly welcome submissions from Protocols.io, but I think all of the other journals will take it as well. So Nature Methods is not here, but if your protocol took 2 years to get to work and is a novel technique, you should consider any journal that is appropriate and that you think you can get your protocol into for peer review. So they're not mutually exclusive. Protocols.io specifically in terms of what's appropriate to publish. Our goal is to make sure that this is a place where if you tweaked something, you can share the link to the exact protocol that you use. So the practice is to cite, we use the protocol from this other team. Here's where it was published. If it's on Protocols.io, if it's a protocol on Protocols.io, we make it very easy to click fork, and we automatically try to give credit and point people to where your branch is coming from so people can navigate between the protocols. There's a button to compare them to see what changed. But the key point of the answer is that for reproducibility, the goal is for you to be sharing methods if you spend a couple of weeks getting it to work, and it's something as simple as instead of finding the lizards in the morning in Death Valley, we switch to doing it in the afternoon. It could be as simple as that. You should share exactly what you've done. So publishers, journals, Protocols.io, we don't set a bar for how much you should have changed in order to share on Protocols.io. That bar is only there if you want it to be peer reviewed and you want to submit to a method journal. I think a rule of thumb is if you've spent a little bit of time, couple of weeks, tweaked a few steps and it's minor, I would just share that as a fork, cite the original. If you've spent a year and a half getting something to work, even if it was previously published, I would consider, if you spent half a year hitting your head against the wall, trying to get something to work, I guarantee you there are other people that are hitting their head against the wall, and those journals that we have here would love to see a submission from you if you want the peer review. You can instantly share on Protocols.io and then send for peer review. These are not mutually exclusive. So if you share in a repository, Journals do not consider that prior publication because it hasn't been peer reviewed. So whether on protocols or Figshare, if you've shared it, you can still get it peer reviewed and publish it. Next question is, does the method journal require method novelty? And from Dr. Guskey, the answer is method journals usually require a certain degree of novelty depending on the journal. That is an editorial decision, and you can find the scope within the journal's websites. And then there's an invitation to another event this week. And Gabrielle, when is your webinar about Ask the Experts? But there's going to be a webinar with editors of some of these journals talking about sharing protocols IO and having it peer reviewed. Actually, I think it's talking about peer reviewing your protocols, not protocols IO specifically, but it is moderated and hosted by Dr. Guskey. So that will dive into what level of novelty is expected by the different journals. The editors from those journals will be there. So that's the Ask the Experts webinar. And that is happening in 2 days at 9 a.m. California time. So should also be, if you're in Europe, should also be possible to catch in late afternoon, early evening. And again, just as this one, it will be recorded and slides will be shared. All right, and I think we have 2 minutes left, and we've gone over all of the questions. So with that, I want to thank everyone who attended. I want to thank the people that have been asking the questions. And my email is lenny@protocols.io. I think I have it on the last slide. If you have questions that we didn't get to, either info@protocols.io or lenny@protocols.io, please don't hesitate to reach out. And again, many thanks to Dr. Guskey and Dr. Gamble. Thank you, everyone. We'll stop the recording here. And hope you have a great rest of the Love Methods week.